Hi and welcome to this edition of Excel for Introductory Statistics. In this activity, we're going to work through the mean and the standard deviation of a frequency distribution. I'm actually going to split this into two separate videos. So I'm going to stop this video after we're done the mean of the frequency distribution, and then we'll pick up right where we left off in the next video to do the standard deviation. So I'm using a previous activity. So from one of the previous videos, we had 70 values. These are the weights in grams of 70 pennies. And previously, we used this data to construct a frequency distribution, which we have right here in blue. So that's a previous result. So we're going to use that in this example. So now let's come up with the mean of this data set, not based on the original data. So what we're going to do is we're going to pretend, okay, we don't have this. This is the original data, but let's pretend for now we don't have this data. And let's come up with the mean of this data set based only on the frequency distribution. Now, the thing is, this is going to be an estimate of the mean. An estimate because we don't have any of the original data in this frequency distribution. Excel doesn't work very well with estimates. It doesn't work in the same way as it does with exact values. If we want the exact value of the mean, we simply use the function equal average, it's a little hard to read, location of data, and in just a couple of seconds we get the average. But what we're doing now, so let me erase this for now, we're coming up with a, excuse me, an estimate of the mean of this data set. And for that, we're going to use, I'll highlight this in yellow, we're going to use this formula for the mean of the data set. The mean of the frequency distribution. Okay, now, again, we don't have any of the individual X values, the individual data values. So if you look down here in red, if you look down here, X is the midpoint of each class. And F is the corresponding frequency. So for our X values, we're going to estimate them. Now this first row of the frequency distribution, it says, okay, well, there are 18 numbers. We don't know what they are, but those 18 numbers are all somewhere between 2.4 and 2.49. So let's just estimate them and say, okay, all 18 of them are copies of the same number, and we'll use the average or the halfway point, the midpoint of each class. So that first X value, we'll say that is the average of A3 and B3, or the lower and the upper class limits. And that's 2.445. Okay, so that what we're saying with that number is that our estimate of our data set is there are 18 copies. That's the frequency. There are 18 copies of this number. All right, and then we'll do the same thing since we use location. This number, this cell is equal to the average of the two cells to the left. We could drag this down, and Excel will repeat that calculation for each of the next 5 cells. Okay, so now we have our estimated X values. This was the first hurdle with calculating a mean because we didn't have any of the original data. So now we have estimates of the original data. 18 copies of 2.445, 19 copies of 2.545, and so on. And if we add up those frequencies, we should get 70 because we know we're working with this data set, 70 pennies. And we'll just verify that. So we'll add those up, equal sum of these frequencies, and that should give us N, the size of the set, 70. Okay, so now back to the formula. So now I'm looking up here, back to this formula. This formula is saying we have to take, this is basically 3 steps. First, we have to take each frequency and multiply it by the x value. So that's going to be step 1. Then we've got to add them up, and then we've got to divide by n. So I've got one column right here labeled f times x. So let's multiply each frequency by the x value. So let's say in this cell, which is E3, I want that to equal the frequency number multiplied by the x value. F times x. And we want that 5 more times. So let's have Excel repeat that calculation 5 more times. Okay, so now in column E, we've got column C times column D. C times D equals E. Okay, so now, still with this formula, now we have to do the addition, add them up. And so that's what I have here at the bottom. So notice that's the numerator, the sum of f times x. That's the numerator of this fraction. So I want to, again, use the sum function, equal sum. Okay, and so that's the top. That's the numerator of the fraction, the sum of the frequency times the midpoints. And now the last thing to do is divide by n. Now we'll do the dividing by n. Let's do that down here for the final answer. Okay, so down here, I want that estimated mean from the frequency distribution. I want that to equal this yellow cell, the sum of f times x, and divide that by n. Okay, and our rounding rule says one more decimal place than the original data. So let's round this to 4 decimal places. 4 decimal places because our original data, these midpoints, have 3 decimal places. All right, so we'll round that to 4. Now, let's go, I'm going to uncross off this original data. So now we're going back. Now we have the original data so we could calculate the exact mean. The exact mean. So from this data, let's calculate the exact average or the exact mean. We've done this before, equal average, parenthesis, location of data, which I'll just select the data with the mouse. And we'll round that. Maybe we'll round both to 3 just for an easy comparison. Now, what we see here, and this is the last thing I'm going to say before I pause and stop this video. We'll pick it up to do the standard deviation. But what we see is the estimate, which involved none of the original data. The estimate involved only these midpoints. These midpoints is what gave us this estimate. These two numbers are only off by 1/1000th of a gram. They are almost the same. And if we round to 2 decimal places, it's with the 2.67 for each. All right, so it's possible to get a very accurate sample statistic or an estimate of a sample statistic from a frequency distribution rather than working with the entire data set. All right, that is it for this video. Again, these estimates on Excel, they take multiple steps because Excel works very seamlessly with exact calculations. The exact mean, it was equal, average, location, enter. That just took a couple of seconds. But estimates, and you'll see this also with the standard deviation, this we have to do in stages, and we're applying the formula from our textbook. All right, I will pick this up in the next video to finish this activity, and we'll calculate the standard deviation of the frequency distribution.